Well, hello everybody again, and welcome to another Healthcare World series. My name is Steve Gardner, Managing Director at Healthcare World. We are, as you probably know by now, the world's leading international healthcare business magazine. It's beautifully sunny here in London, a lovely late spring morning, and that can only mean one thing, that it is that time of year again when we lead into Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. Healthcare World was present and correct at the first edition of a really great event last year, curating the live stage, which we'll be doing again this year. So we hope to see you in Abu Dhabi between the 14th and the 17th of April, so in just a couple of weeks' time. Today's morning session, is to really kind of preview some of the content and some of the interesting things that are going to be going on at Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. We've got a number of our speakers from the different sessions that we're doing, which hopefully will give you a taste and a flavour, enough of a flavour if you haven't already to book your flight and get yourself into Abu Dhabi in a couple of weeks. I'm going to start, though, with the man who put all this together in the first place, the event director, Trevor Prunk from DMG. Trevor, you've got, 10 days to go now. Are you ready? Is it all set up and done?
It's never done until the night before. You know that, Steve. It's things change, things are changing, but no, we're there. It's there's been a consolidation from last year. I mean, you were there last year. I think we exceeded all expectations. This year looks like it's going to be the same again. We've got 45% new exhibitors coming in. We've got some new features in the show. The conferences have been streamlined a bit. So yeah, it's looking good. Fingers crossed, touch wood, all of that sort of stuff. We can't not be ready the night before. So we're ready.
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it? You walk around these events literally the day before, and the stand builds are going on, there's dust everywhere, and you're kind of looking around going, this will never be ready on time, but somehow it always is. So tell me a bit about the event itself. How did it come about? Obviously, you've got Arab Health an hour and a half down the road in Dubai. You've got Global Health an hour's flight to the south in Saudi. How did Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week come about?
It started off during COVID. The DOH have got a huge capacity for testing and everything else. And during COVID, they were taking in testing and vaccine distribution for the world, essentially. That coincided with the DOH wanting to become a major player on the global healthcare scene. And because of that, they tried a few little events, didn't really work. So we came on board. They did actually do something called WILS, which is World International Logistics and Summit. That worked really well, but it was virtual. And then we had a new chairman. There was a new chairman of the DOH, and he said, I actually want to make us have a voice on the global healthcare sector. So that's where we started off. Now, you're right that we do have global health in Saudi. We have Arab Health down the road. I used to be involved in Arab Health, and those events are very commercial in as much as people like Informa and whoever it might be, it's all bottom line driven. Our model is somewhat different. Rather than being exhibition led, conference supported, we're the other way around. It's all about the content. It's all conference led. The exhibition supports it. There's an awful lot of money being spent on bringing leading speakers in. So that's where the revenue goes, or part of the revenue goes. And whereas other shows tend to be commercially driven, as I've said, this one is the only healthcare regulator supported and run show. They're our partner in it. We're unique in that position. So that's where we wanted. The DOH have got two aims. One is to actually bring in the global healthcare sector into Abu Dhabi. The secondary one is to actually then take their name and go to other events. So they go to Bio and the Korea, Far East Europe is their main target areas. So that's the sort of potted history of it. You know, when we started it, people say, but you're just another Arab Health. And we said, well, no, actually we're not. And I think when people turned up last year, they looked around and went, yeah, you've done what you said you were going to.
Yeah, it does mean that it's got a very different exhibitor profile from particularly from Arab Health, in the respect that you've got a lot more of the provider organisations there, which I think, from the point of view of those trying to enter the market, is much better from the perspective of getting good conversations, of understanding, who the kind of runners and riders in the market are. Is that going to be the similar profile of exhibitors to this year? What kind of new elements are there?
Yeah, I think when you look at your traditional trade show, whether you're looking at medical or Arab health or whatever it might be, it tends to be very product driven. As somebody said, if when I was having a conversation in the aisle with them last year, they said if I'd been standing here for 10 minutes, I would have had a load of people trying to sell me syringes and rubber gloves. Ours is, as I said, the exhibitors who are there, we don't have product on the stand. It is there for the DOH, and don't forget the DOH in Abu Dhabi actually regulate all the Emirates, not just one. So it's for the different Emirates to get together and actually have a conversation with the exhibitors about how they can contribute to their ecosystem, their development. There is this huge, I mean, you and I have had this conversation, there's huge investment in life science research and everything else there. And that's the main thrust of where the DOH are going, but the Middle East as well. So it's bringing in everybody from around the world, or around the region, certainly, to talk about investment, innovation, life sciences, preventative healthcare, you name it.
How does Abu Dhabi and its health system differ from the other countries and health systems in the region? You mentioned DOH. Obviously, we've talked about Saudi. What's the difference between your territory and those other ones?
As far I can't really tell you because I don't really pay much attention to what the other countries are doing. All I can say is that from our point of view, if we go back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago when we started talking to DOH, the Department of Health, it was seen as a very quiet, very staid, not very innovative healthcare regulator. And I think a lot of other than Saudi, a lot of the regulators around the place in healthcare ministries tends to be that way. It tends to be very government and very a very traditional way of doing things. The thing about the DOH is that, and Abu Dhabi as a whole, it is very much innovation led. They are talking about healthcare tech, med tech. As I said, the gym of the future is one of the big things because that's all about preventative medicine. And we also have the Innovation Awards, which is actually championing new innovation and the new startups that are coming into it. So they are very, very proactive in actually building their ecosystem.
The gym of the future. Tell me about that. That sounds quite fascinating. How did that come
about? It's all to do with this proactive healthcare. And what the DOH are trying to do is to actually stop you getting unhealthy before you know it. So if you go to the gym of future, the whole idea is that if you in the future you'll turn up at your gym, not something I do very often, but you'll turn up at your gym, and it will recognize who you are. They'll actually do a scan of your body. It will take your vitals. Here in the UAE, we actually have a shahatna, so it will actually bring in all your healthcare details. It will then actually tell with your scan, it will say, right, you're overweight, you're underweight, you're dehydrated, you need to do this. It will then actually plan for you a workout on whether it be treadmill, whether it be weights or whatever it might be. And as you go around the gym, it will tell you what to do, how to do it in the safest way, what muscles are being used, how they're being developed. And it will go through all of this. And then when you get to the far end, it will go, great, this is how you cool down, this is the nutrition you need to carry on and everything else. So I suppose you could look at it as a digital PT, if that's what you want to look at it. But you have to come down and have a look at it because we'll have the setup there for you to try. You can try. It's not a digital paddle course, by the way.
Reference to my personal obsession there. Yeah, so are we expecting people will turn up to the conference rather than in a suit and tie in their workout gear? Is that what you're looking for here?
No, I mean, obviously there are going to be people. Well, obviously they're going to be those people who are interested in taking on this technology to put into either hospitals or or clinics or whatever it might be. But I mean, the main thrust of the conference is it is the main, now called the forum, and that is the diverse, inclusive health and health systems and medical breakthroughs. But the whole big part of, you all know, last year we did the future of healthcare, and this is part of it. It is actually looking at the future innovation. Shahatna and these sort of things, they're building their apps. The DOH have got plans for their own big app as well. So then it's very much a look towards it. I have actually looked at the plan. We won't be stripping down to our shorts and t-shirts, I can assure you. It's not something that I'm not sure everybody would want to see me in my shorts and t-shirt for sure. But it's for people to actually experience and see what it is. And as I said, in that same area, which is the startup zone, there are 30 new startups that the DOH champion, and those are from international whatever. So there's 30 pods there, so people can actually walk around and see what's going on, what new startups are in, what new technology, and if there are investors, that's the opportunity to have a chat and get in at ground level.
You also mentioned Sahatna a couple of times there. For those who don't know Sahatna, can you just give a quick explanation of who they are?
So they used to be called Malafi, now they're called Sahatna, and it's a centralized, the best way of putting it, I suppose, is a centralized healthcare database, so that if you go into any doctor, surgery, dentist, you name it, they can tap into your healthcare vitals and details. So, as you know, if you get run over or you get into an accident here and they cart you off to a hospital, they can actually, we all have EIDs here, or identities, and they can actually pick that up, plug your details in. They can find out what medicines you're on, what your underlying medical details are, or whatever it might be. So it's a centralized, I think the best way of putting it is a centralized medical database that everybody can access.
So no, it sounds like it's going to be a really, really good event this year. Thoroughly looking forward to it. Do you want to just give our audience a quick plug? When do we kick off? What do they need to do in order to get credentialed to get in? When does it start? When does it finish? Just give us the details so that our audience have got clarity.
Okay, well, to get in, it's ADNEC, so it's government, and also we've got a load of ministers. So to get in, you're going to have to actually have a badge. To do that, the easiest way for frictionless registration, go to adghw.com and register. You will need your passport number or Emirates ID if you're in this part of the world, and you'll have to take a photograph as well. That will get you a badge, that will get you in. We kick off at 10 o'clock on the 15th of April with the opening ceremony. It's standing room only. Last year we had 700 people in a 600-seat venue, so it's going to be packed again. So if you would like to come and see the opening ceremony, it's going to be another spectacular. So get there early. So that'll be the opening ceremony. We then kick off with the main agenda and the conference in the afternoon of day one, and then we carry on until 5 o'clock on day 3. The show's timings are 10 till 6 days 1 and 2, 10 till 5 on the last day.
And if anybody's interested, I think you're mostly kind of locking me in my podcast studio, so that's where you'll find me over the course of the week. And actually, that's a good point. You should definitely, wherever you get your podcasts, go and find Health Beats, which is the podcast that I present, which is supported and in association with Trevor and his team at Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. So hope to see you out there. Trevor, thanks so much for that. That's given you a bit of an insight from the top, so to speak, in terms of how the event's going to work, what it's going to be. Let's move on to somebody who's coming for the first time. Ben Caton is Chief Executive Ergo Chair. Ben, how much are you looking forward to Abu Dhabi? Have you been to the Emirate before?
Hey Steve, how you doing? And hey to the audience. Yeah, no, well, look, I'm super excited. I mean, if I could go out there already and be there 2 weeks early, I would. But I think my wife and kids would kill me, so I'm not allowed to do that.
Take them with you. The weather over there is lovely.
Well, I actually took them with me. I took my wife with me to Arab Health a little while ago, obviously, and she thoroughly enjoyed it. But I'm not entirely sure I can afford to do that twice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, shall we say? But no, I mean, it's an incredibly intriguing part of the world, commercially and personally. So yeah, very excited.
So tell us a little bit about, firstly, about ErgoChair, you as an organisation, and also what you're hoping to get out of a week in Abu Dhabi.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, the shortest elevator pitch in the world, because I really could bore people to death with this, but the one that always gets people is we make the world's best almost medical seating. We've become synonymous for many, many years with making seating that is millimeter bespoke and specific for people with physiological conditions, disabilities, disformities. And we've made that seating for blue chips, for NHS, for various health organizations around the world. But then more recently, we've started to put ourselves on the global map. We export to various different nationalities for manufacturing seating that encourages nurses, doctors, any kind of worker to sit more healthily and actually look after their own well-being while they look after that of the patient or the person that they're interacting with. And what are we looking at getting out of it? Well, I mean, look, famous phrase here, not to coin Steve Jobs, but I think it was Mr. Jobs that said, what do you want your dent in the universe to be? Well, actually, the universe of opportunity for us in the GCC is humongous. And I'm really excited about the fact that from what everyone's told me anyway, that this, as Trevor's just said as well, is going to be very much people-centric. It's going to be human interaction. It's going to be, you know, conference-focused as opposed to commercial product-driven. And actually, that's coming from a commercially product guy. But I'm really looking forward to going there and continuing some of the conversations that we've already had at the last event, but in more of a kind of, you know, that human, personable, one-on-one way, and just seeing where it ends up. It seems to be a constantly evolving thing for us, and I'm just excited to get stuck in.
I think there's a couple of really interesting things that, as I was talking to Trevor, I thought, you know, that kind of approach, that kind of idea fits really in a really interesting way with what you're doing, Ben. And we were talking there about Sahatna and about the kind of health information exchange and having the data available on the population. I mean, from your point of view, is that the kind of thing that if you could get access to, if you could be fed that data, could you make the perfect chair that would you know look after the health of the spines and etc. of all of those people? Is that the kind of thing that you do?
Yeah, and that fascinated me when Trevor said it, and I'm glad you picked up on it. I mean, we've got our own piece of proprietary software at ErgoChair that we're about to launch a new version of, but we use this software to allow any occupational therapist, a frontline worker, or even just a general colleague to put in basic anthropometric data and basic medical conditions. And the system actually prescribes the perfect bespoke chair for any human being, and it does it pretty flipping quick and pretty accurately. We've been benefiting from our own data for years and data that's given to us by OTs and HR professionals, but something like that is really a wealth of you know, physiological and anthropometric data, that is a powerful tool for preventative medicine and also for well-being in any workplace, regardless of sector. So yeah, I didn't know it before this, and I'm sure that a few people in the audience didn't like me, but yeah, that was really interesting.
So the other side of that Trevor came out with, he was talking about the gym of the future, of course, and the same idea. You know, you take that data, you take that information, use it to create a bespoke workout. I mean, for next year's ADGHW, can we expect to have people having their own chairs manufactured on site?
Well, hey, I mean, I'm keen if Trevor is. Maybe that's a conversation we'll have after. But ultimately, this narrative, which I found incredibly powerful about, you know, in my limited experience now with the GCC, is it seems to all be about, and I'm not being disparaging to other healthcare markets, but it seems to be a dichotomy, a contrast to those I'm used to, where the GCC nation seems to want action and inertia. They seem to go, okay, well, we've got momentum in this field of preventative medicine, but how can we turn this into a tangible, actionable thing that we're going to go and actually get done? Not next year, not next, but today. And actually, I find that fascinating, and I'm sure the event's going to be more of that. And a lot of healthcare systems, procrastination is the currency. And actually, in the GCC, it doesn't seem to be like that. They seem to just get it done. So quite excited, and yeah, Trevor, you know where to find me now. I'll come and pester you when I'm out there. But that is the type of thing that we do. And manufacturing globally, we're really proud of being a success story of how quickly we can get it done. But actually, we're not interested in the speed at making the chair. We're interested in the 25 years that person gets out of it that changes their work life and their personal life afterwards. So yeah.
And you're going to be joining me on stage, aren't you, for a session where we're talking about how we develop high-performing healthcare workforces. And I think it's a really interesting point. And the reason actually that I invited you to be on that session is because people think about recruitment, they think about education and training, they may even think to some degree about technology. From your experience of speaking to healthcare leaders, how often do they think about the comfort and the working environment for that staff?
Well, I mean, the honest answer here is, if we're going to speak candidly, more often than they used to, but not often enough. The reality is we look at any individual in that healthcare ecosystem and we understand to a greater degree now, every single day that goes past, the pressures that they're under. And we understand how the environment around them has a direct correlation to their performance and the outcome for the patient. We don't yet necessarily understand the value of that physical environment around them. We understand the value of culture, we understand the value of support systems, but we don't look at the physical environment. And the horror story I would give is that actually, and don't worry, this isn't anyone on this call or anyone in the audience, but I mean, I was in a healthcare environment in another nation in the EU fairly recently. And, this is a very forthcoming, proactive, so say from the outside healthcare ecosystem. And all their clinics still had basic, immovable, old school desks, L-shaped desks, seating that had no swivel, screens that didn't have any movement on them. And these individuals are sat there doing between 8 and 15 appointments a day. Is it any wonder that the patient in appointment 15, sadly, gets on average a shorter appointment time and a greater risk of a poorer outcome? So we've got to understand it.
I mean, I suppose the flip side of that is they can't get out of the chair anyway by the end of that period of time, so they just end up stuck there forever.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously you came out to the Middle East, to Dubai in January. You're now coming back out in May. What was your experience of the region when you first visited, and has that changed your view of the healthcare systems of the region at all?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I would like to think, as I'm sure everyone does, I pride myself on not having too many misconceptions. But the reality is, even if you visited the region from a personal perspective, which I had before, if you haven't been out there in a commercial vein, it's hard to understand quite how different it's going to be. But I would say different for the better. I've actually spoken to quite a few people, colleagues of mine in different areas of UK-centric manufacturing since I've come back. And I've said, just get out there. It's so more human focused. Human connection is paramount. Introduction and connection is paramount. And actually, go out there, relinquish your misconceptions, and ultimately don't pretend to know the market. Find people that know the market and they will guide you through it. But it's been an incredibly positive experience for me because it was far more human connection focused than I thought it was going to be. And then also really than I found in other markets.
So what are your kind of expectations of the week then? What are your kind of top 3 things that you want to achieve during the course of Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week?
Well, one of them's already been mentioned, which I must admit, this wasn't a paid plug. So thanks, Trevor, for mentioning kind of preventative medicine and getting me on the football there. But actually, that is one of the things I'm most excited about. This is, my trip a couple of months ago, whatever it was, probably not even that, but time flies. I was just absolutely enamored with this kind of notion of preventative medicine, but we're taking action on it and we're moving it forward. So I'm excited for the conversations. I want to absorb as much as I can from I'm going to be going to as many talks as I can and running between them. I'm sure at some point you're going to grab me by the collar and drag me into a podcast studio. But I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to seeing actually how this conference-led environment allows candid discussion around topics that actually some healthcare ecosystems are worried about bringing up. The GCC seems unafraid to have real conversations about really important topics. I'm looking forward to that. And actually, I'm looking forward to seeing virtually everyone that I met at the last event, I think is going to this event too. And yeah, I just want to continue some of those conversations. They've been pretty exciting so far, and it's all fresh to me. But yeah, it should be really, really good.
I think with the level of enthusiasm and positivity you're taking into this, Ben, I don't think you can fail. I think from that point of view as well, where can people get hold of you? If we've got people in the audience today thinking, I need me one of those chairs, how do they get hold of you?
Yeah, well, obviously you can find ergochair.co.uk, go on the website, and you can have a look at some of the products we do. Me personally, I want as many conversations as possible. I love a chat, and I'm addicted to coffee, digital or otherwise. I'll take the excuse. So find me on LinkedIn, and yeah, I would love to catch up with as many of the audience as possible. And obviously at the event itself, I'll be running around like a lunatic if I'm not in a podcast studio.
Fantastic. Or on a stage. You'll be on the live stage as well, don't forget.
I will make sure I'm there, Steve. Don't panic. That is the one non-negotiable.
Brilliant. Ben, I'm really looking forward to seeing you out in Abu Dhabi. For the time being, though, thank you very much. Best of luck for the event. I'm sure it's going to be a brilliant week. And moving on from a conversation about chairs, we couldn't really flip into a more different topic. One of the sessions that I'm going to be hosting on the live stage, we've got a combination over the course of the week of panel sessions on really interesting topics, some really interesting debates, and also something that's slightly different this year. We've got a number of fireside chats. So a couple of 2 or 3 really interesting people that we've been able to handpick. Trevor and his team trusted us to go out and pick out some of the more interesting conversations for discussions on some of the really, really interesting topics in healthcare. One of those fireside chats will be with Dr. Emma McSweeney, who I'm very pleased to say is joining us now from taking time out of a conference in Austria. Emma, how are you? This is where the technical issues kind of come in, and Emma is on my screen but frozen. Emma, are you there?
I'm fine. Sorry, I think I lost connection there just for a second. Yes, no, I'm great, and thank you so much for inviting me to have a few words and also to take part in the fireside chat at the conference.
So yeah, I mean, and the reason why, in your particular case, is a particularly personal reason. About a year or so, it's Mother's Day was 2 days ago here in the UK, and it's about 12 months ago now that I lost my own mother to one of the most horrible conditions I think that there is out there. She suffered for several years from Alzheimer's. She didn't know who I was towards the end, and as I think a lot of Alzheimer's patients do, eventually decided she'd had enough, stopped eating, and essentially starved herself to death. But there is now hope, is there not, for people in my position or the position I was in last year in terms of new treatments for Alzheimer's and that's something that you've been heavily involved in. Do you want us to tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing and the treatments that you're bringing on stream for Alzheimer's?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steve. So this is an incredibly exciting time in sort of like neuroscience, but particularly in Alzheimer's, which, I think if people don't know, sort of like are probably already appreciating is a pandemic. So labeled by WHO as a pandemic in 2018, and really sort of like no healthcare economy can sustain the sort of with the aging population, age being the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's, can sustain this condition without what's called disease-modifying treatment. So the new treatments that we're working with extensively in clinical trials, but now, very exciting, 2 of these treatments have just come on the market. So those 2 treatments, they're monoclonal antibodies against amyloid protein. And in the brain, the 2 key things that are at the sort of like underlying pathology of Alzheimer's disease is this abnormal accumulation of toxic amyloid protein and tau protein. So for the first time, it's possible to both use biomarkers to detect the presence of this disease in the brain very early, and then provide treatments which are designed to slow down, and eventually these treatments will be designed to stop and even prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So we're just at the beginning now of these first drugs coming on the market. So it is a sort of like time at which it's fair to be extremely cautiously optimistic, but to say that the outcome of this disease and the outcome for individuals suffering from Alzheimer's disease is going to be changed.
So the amyloid protein that you talked about there, is that the thing that has been sort of recognised or discovered to be the cause of Alzheimer's?
So the cause ultimately really is neuroinflammation. And through a series of quite complicated processes, that leads to the buildup of this toxic amyloid protein. And the toxic amyloid protein gets dumped down on top of the brain cells, the cognitive brain cells, and eventually it causes those brain cells to just sort of like shrink and die. But there's also a protein called tau protein that is very important in the progression of this disease as well. But the initial treatments just on the market now, they are designed to remove that abnormal toxic protein back down into the normal range. And the fantastic thing about the big studies that resulted in these two drugs being approved by FDA and MHRA, the drug regulatory authorities, is that not only does it remove the toxic levels of amyloid protein, but that correlates with slowing a progression of disease and symptoms.
So from that point of view, we can't cure somebody from Alzheimer's because the as you explained it there, if I've understood it correctly, the brain cells that are affected by that toxic protein, they die as opposed to just being ill, as it were.
So Alzheimer's is really no different from any other disease, which, like it's slowly progressive. But one of the things that is really important about Alzheimer's is these abnormal proteins actually start to rise in the brain long before the development of symptoms. The amyloid protein starts to rise about 20 years before an individual starts to develop symptoms. By the time they start to develop symptoms, they invariably will have tau protein in the brain as well. So the opportunity is really not just the development of the treatments, but also these biomarkers. So if you have a treatment which is designed to slow something down, you want to give it as early as possible. And actually in the future, ideally as a preventative measure before symptoms begin. But the only way you can do that is you also have in parallel the development of these sophisticated biomarkers that tell you that you have the presence of the disease even before you start to get the symptoms. But today, the two new drugs that have come on the market, one is called Kisunla, or it's donanemab by Eli Lilly. The other is Leqembi or lecanemab by Eisai. Those drugs are licensed, and they're licensed in the UAE, which is obviously one of the reasons why we're very interested. They have recently been licensed for people with mild, sort of like what's called MCI, mild cognitive impairment, which can actually be really very mild symptoms of cognition, and what's called mild AD dementia. But obviously, once people have progressed beyond a certain point, then those treatments designed to slow it down are no longer effective. So early action is the most important message, because early action enables us to make a diagnosis using biomarkers, which is accurate, and then to give people the opportunity to get early access to one of these medications designed to slow down further progression. And
sorry, please carry on.
No, I was going to say the reason this is so interesting at the moment as well is that there are lots of other medications in clinical trial currently, which, almost definitely will be coming on the market, the next year, the next 18 months, the next 2 years. And they too will be for people who have mild symptoms, all different mechanisms of action to try to prevent further progression of disease and symptoms. And the trick really is being able to access the medications available now so that you can stay mild in terms of your symptoms. So you can also avail of other new medications also designed for people with mild symptoms as they start to emerge onto the market. So that's why this is such a pivotal time for this disease.
And it's interesting, I mean, you talk there about the biomarkers, you talk there about kind of catching the disease early, which I guess is similar to the way that we think about cancer.
Yeah.
And we're going to be joined, actually, it's interesting, a lot of my fireside chats are one-to-one. In your particular case, we're going to be joined by the head of diagnostics for M42, one of the two big leading provider groups in the UAE. And I haven't had a chance to explain this yet, but the reason why she's joining us is because when we were talking to the senior group of people that we know at M42, one of them actually turned around to us and said, we've got a colleague who's really, really interested in Alzheimer's and really interested in how we deal with Alzheimer's. And specifically, she's interested in the point about how you test and how you diagnose. So from that standpoint, I mean, is it something that you know, I mean, again, looking at my own experience, my mother died of the issue a year or so ago. It's thought, I believe, to be hereditary. Does this mean that I could go out and get a test and find out whether I've got a proclivity for this disease and then preemptively take the drug? Is that how this is expected to work?
So that will definitely be the case in the future. So right now, in fact, we are doing clinical trials right now for people who are cognitively normal. We measure in the clinical trial whether or not they have high biomarkers for amyloid and tau already. And if they do have that, then they can come into a study. And we have one particular study, which is actually for a vaccine against tau protein. So the purpose of this type of work, which is in clinical trials today, is to create exactly that scenario for the future. And I don't know, you know, could that be 5 years? Could it be 10 years? But yes, it's quite likely that in the future, around the age of, I don't know, maybe 45, 50, everybody just gets tested to see if they already have these at-risk biomarkers now, and then they have a treatment to ideally push out or prevent them ever developing symptoms. And it's no different from treatment of diabetes or hypertension or, you know, as you say, cancer, doing a marker for prostate cancer and then sort of looking for treatment or doing colonoscopy. I mean, it's exactly the same as any other preventative initiative. Now, your specific question about the sort of like genetic predisposition, that there is one type of Alzheimer's disease which affects really quite young people, sort of like 20s and 30s, and they all have several first-degree relatives. It's a very different scenario. But what is very common is we all have something called an apoprotein E gene, and about 3% of the global population have an apoprotein E gene, which is 4/4, so they get a 4 from each parent. Now, in that case, if you have 2 4s, apoprotein E 4/4, then you don't inherit the disease, but you inherit a higher risk of potentially getting the disease. And you've got sort of like maybe 12 to 15 times more likelihood that you will develop Alzheimer's disease if you have that genetic biomarker. But if you look at it the other way around, because it's a low percentage of the population that have this, then only about probably about sort of like 20% of people who have Alzheimer's disease have that 4/4 combination. So it's and the answer, and then there's also some people have 1/4, and that increases your risks a little bit. But right now, unless you can either get into a clinical trial to access one of these medications almost like prophylactically, or it's not worth, you know what I mean? Like if you're two and you haven't got any symptoms at all, there's no point doing a test if you don't know what you're going to do with the answer, other than maybe just to have the knowledge so that you're sort of like super alert to all the other sort of like modifiable risk factors as exercise, diet, sort of like low sugar diet, keeping your brain really active, sleep, all these other things, which actually are significant and serious modifiable risk factors, which, we, like everything, we should all be doing all the time. So there's a lot of education involved in this. But, the good thing is that either through clinical trials or through the drugs now on the market, if you do have mild cognitive symptoms, there is a chance to access medications that will potentially change your future.
No, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think it's really particularly prescient and particularly interesting that you're coming out to Abu Dhabi for Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week at this particular time, because certainly the work that I've done in the Middle East over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, two absolutely key agenda items across the healthcare markets of the region are the development of treatment and capacity around mental health, but also the preventative agenda. There is a huge amount of work going on across the region to think about how we create an environment around preventative care. I think Trevor nodded to it in the conversation we had earlier on in this session. What are your hopes from the week in Abu Dhabi? What are you looking to get out of it?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm really interested to talk to people who are sort of like already working very interested in this field. And ultimately, we would like very much to bring our experience and expertise to work with doctors in Abu Dhabi and UAE, in the wider UAE. We've given over 6,000 of these doses of this particular type of new treatment, which, like everything, does come with sort of like, risks as well as benefits. And because we've had so much experience with these drugs, with this group of patients, one of our sort of, main sort of like objectives as a company, both we got 6 centers in the UK, 4 in the US, is actually to help to facilitate the rapid translation of what's going on in really high quality medicine in clinical trials into everyday clinical practice, and to accelerate the, effectively the experience and expertise to bring these, to enable these drugs to be widely used and safely.
And those that are watching that want to have a chat, that are interested in finding out more, how do they get hold of you?
Well, certainly I'd love to meet anyone at the conference, but also please do contact our website, Recognition Health. There's Recognition Health UK, Recognition Health USA. They both interlink, and please contact me directly via my email, which I can give right now, but it's emacsweeney@re-cognitionhealth.com.
Fantastic. Well, really looking forward to seeing you and having a more in-depth discussion on this topic in Abu Dhabi. As I say, an area that I'm really passionate about. Thank you for all the work you've done so far. And I think, as you say, Alzheimer's as a pandemic, what a genuinely terrifying thought that is. Horrible disease to suffer with. It's nice to see that you're easing people's suffering. So thanks, Emma. We'll let you get back to your conference in Austria.
Thank you very much. Thanks
for joining us. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, that's just one of the absolutely fascinating conversations and discussions we're going to be having on the live stage during Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. Another, which we nodded to a little bit in the conversation with Ben earlier on, is this one about building high-performance healthcare teams. And one of the countries of the world where I believe satisfaction amongst healthcare workers is very high is Sweden. And we're joined this morning by Bjorn Alma from Skåne Care, who works with the Swedish government. Bjorn, you've been to Abu Dhabi before. You've been around the region a little bit. As Ben did earlier on, perhaps you could reflect for us on, what is it about the Middle East that you feel presents opportunity for Swedish healthcare to help them to develop?
For me, I get energized every time I'm there because, of course, the speed of transformation, as Ben was mentioning as well, is at a very high pace. Compared to some of our systems, which in Europe are perhaps more rigid in some ways, and it's also a very young system in the Middle East. So most of the managers are not close to retirement; they're actually quite fresh and they have a hunger for best practice from around the world. Now that inspires me because there's so much best practice to share. Nobody has all the answers, but having an open mindset, and that's what I like very much in the Middle East.
And it is. I mean, as I said in the introduction, there, Sweden is consistently ranked as being a country that has high scores in terms of job satisfaction amongst its healthcare workers. How are you achieving that? Why are doctors and nurses in Sweden happier? Is it because they've got ergo care?
I'm not sure. I mean, every nation is having frustrations with their own healthcare system. So, in Sweden, we think the NHS is one of the best in the world. But when you speak to British people, they are quite frustrated. And likewise here, we see so many issues that should be addressed. Having said that, yes, it's true. The outcomes are great. And I think overall, and in an international comparison, yes, it's doing well, and it's partly based on necessity, because it's a small country, and we have had so much challenges in our workforce that it's necessity driven almost. It's of course much cheaper to keep the staff you have than to train new ones. So retention has been top of mind for the last, I don't know, 20 some years. It's also partly, and I think that's where Sweden is a bit radical, we have a system which is very flat in hierarchy. It doesn't mean that you don't have leadership from the top. Of course, the vision and the drive must be there, but the day-to-day decision making is more so here than I think in many parts of the world, left to the frontline staff, who actually day-to-day and minute by minute doing the decisions, and they are empowered and they feel the trust from senior management. There are of course exceptions, but in general, I had a team here from Saudi Arabia on tour, going through different aspects of our healthcare system, and they were amazed how, when you meet the frontline staff, it's usually the nurses who explain how things are done, and the doctors stand next to them and just nod, and they feel confident. It's not like the nurse is stealing the limelight from the doctor. It's just that the nurses, they actually do know more in many cases, and the doctor is more focused on the complex cases, and so I think that's turned out quite well. It's also gradually, the last 10 or so years, there's been a focus on keeping the staff, not in terms of course, salaries are not the best, and we need to attract people, but it's also to realize that people working with healthcare are value driven. So you need to fill the sense of purpose and the feeling that you actually make a difference, and to free up, get away all the disturbing admin or tech or whatever, which is not helping you perform. I think we've done that pretty well.
Because there is an issue there, I think, isn't there, around technology, particularly when it comes to workforce. Is technology an enabler of efficiency in the workforce, or can it sometimes be a disabler, in the respect of, are we providing too many systems? Are we providing the right training on those systems? What's your view?
Well, I agree, and sometimes the higher you get in management levels in discussions, the more you start discussing the features of the different tech. But frontline are more concerned in the functionality as such. So I mean, you could have some really old systems that work phenomenally well. Having said that, of course, you should strive to have the latest systems, because the older systems are often less integrated, and we need, with the complex healthcare system, we need to integrate better. So there's a challenge there. I think one of the key, and we have made some mistakes in that. We had a top-down push of a new EMR system in one of the regions that failed so miserably that it was cancelled, and it happened just now, some months ago. In one of the regions. And I think one of the reasons there was that the frontline staff didn't feel involved in the process. And the same system is used in another region, and it seems to be going quite well. So it needs to be involvement from the frontline staff, because they don't want the tech because of the tech. They just want to meet the patient, free up time, and of course get support from the system.
So what you're saying there essentially is it's vital to socialise any technological change with the people, get their buy-in to that before you actually start implementing a piece of technology.
Yeah, and involve them, and also some of the ideas from the front line might not be something you would normally think about. For example, we just opened a new hospital here in Malmö. We have 23 operating theaters. All of them have windows. And you might think, why windows? Because the patient is asleep. Yeah, but for the staff, because the staff, is it snowing outside? Is it a sunny day? It does make a difference. You're spending several hours I mean, why not see, oh, wow, the sun is out. This is a nice day. So things like that. I mean, and nobody had thought of that before because the patient is down anyway, so you don't need windows.
I can almost hear Ben in my other ear telling you you've got to buy them all an ergo chair.
Yes.
Again, that kind of environment piece being really, really important.
Yeah.
I mean, what else? What are the other key factors, do you think, in making sure that your workforce is efficient and working to the top of their license?
I think it's about trust in the entire system, and of course you need the strong frameworks from the government and the policies and all these things. But when it comes to actually running the system, it needs to be trust-based. Because the people working here, they have trained all their life. They need to have a right to continuous training, education, and upskilling. It's not a perk. It's something that actually will improve the healthcare as well. But it's also that anybody has a right to make their voice heard. That's something I think Sweden is excelling in, is that everybody's voice is valid. So and that's maybe with the flat hierarchy thing. I enjoy it when a nurse can actually, just say, hang on, let's not do that because that's never going to work. Or when they are designing a multi-billion-dollar hospital and they're saying, hang on, you forgot in the emergency or in the intensive care unit, you forgot to have hot water to flush all the tubes and things. We can't, go doing it manually, and you have to redesign this. So to avoid major disasters being discovered too late. So involved in the entire process. Of course, the downside of that is that it can take 15, 20 years to design a hospital, which is costly in itself. So you need to strike a balance. Everybody cannot have an opinion on where the coffee machine should be, but it's
as close to me as possible is the answer to where the coffee machine should be.
Exactly.
So again, I mean, what are you hoping to get out of your week in Abu Dhabi?
Well, for me, it's the networking. I'm an expert facilitator. I'm not an expert myself. I listen and I try to catch from the Swedish side where there is knowledge and on the client side where there are needs. And I try to just set up meetings, video meetings, etc., and try to connect. Because in healthcare, if you invest, the processes are so long and the investments are huge. So by just allowing for a couple of video meetings and perhaps a few visits, you can save millions by designing a intensive care unit in a slightly different ways. Because once you've built it, you're stuck for 60 to 80 years with this building. And it could be small routines, pathways, etc. How best practices are, healthcare should be shared around the globe. I think there's far too little about that. There's too much inventing of the wheel in facilities. Also in Sweden, within the country, we have too many local inventions, but sometimes that's good. Sometimes you get a new best practice, but encouraging, I think that's the problem also in public sector, is that we don't allow for the cost of sharing knowledge, because so you can build a building, nobody questions if it's $1 billion additional cost, what somebody will, but the millions can tick on quite quickly. But traveling to a couple of other hospitals to see the best practice, that could save so much money. So I think the sharing and investing in this sharing, that's something we could be better at.
A couple of years ago, Bjorn, you famously wandered around Arab Health in Dubai with a big badge on it that said, "Ask me about Swedish healthcare." Will the badge be making an appearance in Abu Dhabi?
I don't know. Let's see. We'll see.
All I can say is that if you do want to know about Swedish healthcare and you want to know about how the Swedish government and the Swedish healthcare system is looking to share its knowledge and expertise, Bjorn is the man to find, and he will be there all week at Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week and appearing on the Healthcare World stage. So do please look him up there. Thanks very much for your time, Bjorn. We must move on. So, session there that we talked about around building high-performing healthcare teams. And the seamless link here is that we also have a session that talks about how we work out what good looks like. How do we understand the quality of the healthcare that we're delivering? And for this session, for our session on using data to drive quality improvement, I'm joined by two of our panelists, by Julie Coop, who was nodding along enthusiastically when Bjorn was talking about nurses as decision makers, as a nurse herself, and Gerard Hanratty from Lawyers Brown Jacobson, who is a data expert, amongst other things. Julie, Gerard, really, really good to see you. Julie, I'm going to start with you, if I may. You've been working in Abu Dhabi now for quite some time around this quality improvement agenda. What are the issues that you're seeing? Where are the areas in which improvement is required?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Steve, and nice to meet everybody. Yeah, I've been in the region now for coming up to 6 years now. So I feel like I'm an old hand. And to relate to some of the things that the people have said already today, it is a region that fills you with excitement because things change on a penny. Things can change overnight. I heard earlier about Sahatna, which is now the name of what
I could see you scribbling when that name was mentioned. Yeah.
Nothing else has changed.
I think it's the third different name that organisation.
Yeah, well, every day's a new day. But people adapt to it very quickly, and that's what is so exciting about the region, that they will change and they are enthusiastic with the change. I, as you said, have been working here for quite some time and started really to work with a group of organisations, a group of hospitals, to expose their data. Really, that's what they wanted to do. We as an organisation have created a platform that enables collaboration and visualisation across a number of organisations. Through exposure of that data, it engaged people to try to understand where their issues lay, and focus on performance and efficiency improvement. Again, because of the enthusiasm of the people, as soon as something is highlighted, they are jumping on it. And I have done a similar job in the UK. And I'm not putting down the UK, but the questions I would get in the UK about what I was exposing when there were quality issues just ground you down. You just couldn't get on and actually start to improve. So I think there is a huge focus on improving the quality of care for their patients, for it to be globally best. And I've seen that written many times from many organisations, but actually it feels like they mean it here and they want to compare to where the best are. And there are many different focus areas that everybody is grabbing onto and really working hard to do something about it. But I think what's more interesting is that they are now getting ready to expose their information and starting to share a little bit more and share best practice, which is obviously going to help us all improve.
So from that standpoint then, you've been doing this for a wee while now. Are there particular areas, particular challenges that you see within the system? Are there particular problems that need solving?
I think what is difficult is when they as a region want to take best practice from other regions, and when we compare them culturally and regionally, they are different. So for instance, if we focused on particular pathways, we focused on TB, which we don't see a lot of in many regions of the world, but there is TB in some of their population. To actually treat that disease as a pathway is quite different because of the community services that they have in place or don't have in place, or where people live, they tend to live together, the workers will live together, so it's kind of hard then to discharge patients home and look after themselves because they're obviously likely to infect other people. So taking best practice from other regions, you really have got to then consider how you regionalize it to that district, or else learn about how we start to change their clinical systems to offer improved performance and outcomes.
Gerard, in terms of that benchmarking piece, in terms of kind of what Julie's talked about there about comparing data with other systems, how readily available is the data in other systems to compare to? How do you get access to data from other systems that will allow you to do the kind of benchmarking Julie wants?
It's a good question, Steve, and morning, everyone. So we have done some work with the UAE UK Business Council over how do you share. This was specifically on cancer data. And the reality is it's not too easy. What we could really do with is almost, BSI or another worldwide accepted standard to enable sharing without having to go through multiple processes in different jurisdictions, which is a problem. So we can agree we're going to share in the UK. In another jurisdiction, they may say, well, hold on, we need to look at the basis for this. We need to look at the security, and then we need to make a decision. And so you're not, you're comparing apples and oranges as opposed to comparing two systems that are focused on sharing the data to enable, developments to occur. So, genomics is a perfect example, but trying to create a huge library of all of the genomics data we have for use across the world, that will take a long time, because everybody has a different view to it and a different approach to it. And I mean, the other thing is, currently at the minute, we are in the middle of, worldwide turmoil, for want of a better phrase, in terms of how people will work together, how people will share. And even within the UK, I mean, I sit there in a lot of meetings and everybody tells me data is the starting point. It's like, okay, data is a starting point, but there are a few things like how secure is the data? So people forget about cybersecurity really quickly because they're focused on, we want the data, as opposed to how good is your supply chain? How good is your security? And then in terms of what we're doing here in the UK at the minute, and again, kind of taking a point that Julie made and making 2 points from that. So one is, we focus very much on looking at what have we done in the past that we have done wrong. And we have a number of public inquiries. And public inquiries are fantastic for lawyers like me and my teams, because we spend a long time going through a lot of data. We spend a long time sitting in court. These don't take months. These don't even take a year. These take 3-4 years. And at the end of the day, healthcare and medicine has moved miles ahead. It's like, it's over the horizon and out the distance. And instead, we're trying to implement lessons from the past. They're not implemented. And we focus very much on the negatives, as opposed to looking at what are we doing well, how can we improve what we're doing? And we spend a lot of money on doing that, which is something I think we need to change from what we're doing. The other thing is we do top-down reorganization. So there's an interesting thing. I don't know whether any of you have read any of the stuff. So Jim Mackey's quoted this morning in the HSJ, and he says something really interesting, which is, let's get back to looking at patients. And it's really important we get back to looking at patients, because instead what we're doing is we are looking at how do we actually organize our ability to deliver the services? Not even how do we deliver the service, how do we organize our ability to do it? And within that, and one of the things people haven't quite realized with the abolition of what is NHS Digital, which is the kind of the standing point between our government in the UK and the delivery services of NHS providers, is that we're abolishing this body called NHS Digital. NHS Digital is focused on looking after data, managing data, creating data streams so we can actually look at quality, we can do benchmarking. And the question is, what are we going to do now in order to provide the data nationally for benchmarking? So in the past, providers have had outcome data, benchmarking data. We need to provide it nationally, then we need to share it internationally. Then you start to get, the amazing ability to help people with Alzheimer's, with Parkinson's, and with all sorts of other conditions that we've struggled to deal with.
So, Julie, coming back to you then, in reference to what Gerard said there, a very different environment and a very different proactive nature in terms of, you know, how you're going about helping to solve problems in the UAE to what's currently going in the UK. Is it maybe a question of actually the UK could learn an awful lot of lessons from the way that you're doing things in Abu Dhabi?
One of the frustrations I have with working in the UAE is that they are not they're not great about shouting about how good they are to other regions. So when I talk about sharing, the first project that I did in the UAE was actually benchmarking them against Australia. So we did have access to all of the what was called the Health Roundtable data. It was Australia, New Zealand hospitals data. And when we made those comparisons, because the organisations wanted to look at where they really stood out as being different when they compared globally, actually some of the areas they performed really well. And I think it was quite shocking to them because they'd never compared themselves, but they'd never even compared internally before. And I think one of the things that I really want to change, not in this region, but definitely in the UK, is that we stop being a silo. We stop looking after ourselves and we share more. And we share more about where we're not performing that well, but we're open about it because we want to get better. And I think the annoying thing about access to data, even aggregated data, is that it's preventing us actually improving around the world. So our little project looking at Australian data made a huge difference to that group of organisations to help them focus on specific disease pathways. The loss of NHS Digital is frightening to me because I used to work for a company that did benchmark across all of England, and it made a dramatic difference to the performance in this region. For that to go, I feel like we're going a little bit backwards, so worrying.
It's an interesting point, Gerard, that you raised though as well around global political turmoil, and you know, I guess for global political turmoil, we're mostly referring to some of the really interesting and radical things that are coming out of the US at the moment. I just wonder though whether, as with all situations like this, where a negative can turn into a positive, and certainly. I was in Saudi Arabia at the point when the WHO funding was being discussed about being pulled, and there was a feeling there that actually the US situation would create better opportunities for us to look at. You know, it almost drives us together. Is there a chance or a possibility that kind of global turmoil could bring the US and the UK and Europe closer together?
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, I mean
the Middle East and Europe. I just realised.
Well, you can talk about, you know, whether you agree, don't agree with some of the US policies. The reality is, what they are doing is they're disrupting, and you can look at disruption as either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on where you sit on the fence. Generally, I try to look at it as a good thing. You know, when you look at the UK, and we do sometimes, certainly in the UK, do a bit of, you know, NHS bashing. The reality is that it is an amazing state system. It has, for a number of years now, provided amazing healthcare for people. And as a result of that, also has amazing data, which will help us to understand how to deal with a number of conditions that we've struggled with dealing with, including cancer, Parkinson's. You know, we've got a client called Stroll who do this amazing bit with Parkinson's and helping people to walk again, and how that all works. But I think one of the things that we have to be clear about is that it is much better to be able to share data across the globe for a number of reasons. Firstly, different countries have better doctors in certain areas. Okay, that's just a reality. You know, they attract them, they keep them, they give them the research. They're doing a lot of good work. So let's just start thinking about that. The other thing which we're seeing a lot more now is that everybody talks about AI. We spend our life talking about AI. AI is only as good as the data it has. Okay, so you can have the best AI going. You could have spent years developing it. If it's got rubbish data, it's not going to do a huge amount for you, really, in what it does. So in order to really look at the positive opportunity from AI, we need to have really good data. And a lot of people then start talking to you about data bias and ethically, how do you make sure that that doesn't happen? And you know, I have lots of discussions about that, although, you know, realistically, I'm looking to help them create their framework. And we don't have, so and nowhere in the world, I personally don't believe we have great AI regulation yet. We have regulation, but we have people who are trying to close down the ability at times rather than open up the opportunity and allow people within a framework some flexibility to operate. But I think within that, what we have to do is, if you want to get rid of bias, certainly in healthcare, you need to share the data across the world. Sorry, that's my dog barking. She's getting very excited over the fact that she thinks data should be shared worldwide.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, incredibly.
If you share the data worldwide, you will start to reduce the bias. You will always get bias in data. It's inherent in its nature. But you will start to reduce that, and you will give AI a much better opportunity and ability to look at what are the main factors in these diseases, how can we start to address them, and how can we actually start to share that across the world for the benefit of patients.
It's a fascinating topic, which we will have more time for this when we're on stage in Abu Dhabi. I think that we've got to move on now, unfortunately. Thanks to Gerard, thanks to Julie. Please do find both of them on LinkedIn. I think, Gerard, one of the things that we ought to do, we ought to look at while we're out in Abu Dhabi is this question of AI regulation, what's being done there in terms of AI and data regulation, and what could be learnt and taken internationally from that perspective. And Julie, the good work that you continue to do in terms of the improvement of quality through use of data, we'll be discussing that on the live stage, what is going to be a fantastic session, which involves colleagues from Sahatna, which is the third name of the organisation that we originally knew as Malafi. So thoroughly looking forward to that. As with all of our speakers, please look them up on LinkedIn. Please reach out to them. And if you can't find them, come to us at Healthcare World. We're always happy to facilitate an introduction. And somebody that you will all in the audience definitely want an introduction to is my next guest, Mo from Patients Know Best, who is the author of 7 books, I think now, on patient experience and the link between patient experience and digital. You're going to be one of my fireside chats at Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. And I'm really looking forward to this one. We nodded earlier on in the conversation to the desire and the motivation for workforce to engage with digital healthcare and technology. How often do we think about the desire and the will and the socialization of technology to the patient? Because that is your primary area of concern, is it not?
That's right, yes. I mean, for me, it started just with me as a patient myself. When I was 16, I remember a nurse coming by to see me. I was a grumpy teenager. I was in a ward of 60-year-olds. And by the way, there might have been 30, and I just decided there were 60 when I was age 16. But I hated being ill. I hated being there. But there is where I got my infusion for my rare disease. And the nurse asked me, do you want to learn how to do this for yourself at home? And before I could admit that I was scared of needles, this before I went to medical school, she taught me how to inject myself and take care of myself. It was life-changing, right? So that's what I find really interesting, because I was thinking of her years later when I was interviewing a doctor in the USA who was sharing medical records with his patients. And one of the patients spotted a mistake in his care. The patient had read the radiology report that mentioned the patient's cancer, but which the doctor had missed. And the doctor's reaction was really exciting to me. Of course, he'd made a mistake. He's a human, so he makes mistakes. But after this mistake, he began asking all his patients to help, asking them to pay attention with him. And that's the attitude my nurse had taught me as a patient about my own illness. And in that year, in 2007, the technology was there to help hundreds of millions of people to help themselves by understanding and acting on their data. That's what got me interested in this, basically.
So why do we not, why is it not a de facto standard to actually share that information with patients? Why are Why are health systems keeping it to themselves?
I think most people aren't trying to keep it to themselves. It's just difficult to do it. You've got to do it from the right technical and the security and the privacy and the clinical safety and so on. It is hard. I mean, that's what I was noticing when I was starting in the research in 2007. And then by the time I kind of snapped and said, I have to do this myself, is that everybody wanted to do this. Everybody struggled in how to do this. And so what you needed is some party that was doing this every day to help everybody who was doing this for the first time in their lives. And so that's what Patients Know Best became. It was, how do we focus 100% on this, that we coach everybody else through the process of releasing data and working with their patients.
So is it a mindset change that's required within health systems? Because at the end of the day, I think one of the issues is, particularly when you look at technology, that it's the clinicians, it's the technologists within the system that are developing the technology. How many digital health startups came up with a good idea from a clinician, and how many of them came up with a good idea from a patient?
Well, I do think people focus on what they know and what they're paid to know. I mean, here's a quote for you from one of our board meetings. Our chairman brought this out one day in a board meeting. Hospitals are patient-centered in the way that abattoirs are animal-centered, right? So you can imagine the rest of the board meeting. But basically, everybody says they're person-centered, and I believe they want to be. But they're actually centered on what they personally are doing and what matters to them. And so you see, for example, the hospitals building a hospital portal. They call it My Chart instead of My Hospital's Chart. The NHS app is built around the NHS commissioners rather than all the people helping the patient, which of course include the patient, include the NHS, but also so many others, including the patient themselves. And the reason that mind shift matters is that patients are the largest providers of healthcare. It's the patient who injects their insulin for their diabetes or takes the inhaler to prevent their asthma attack. And most of health spending is on long-term conditions where what the patient does matters more than what the doctor does. So when you miss the patients out of your thinking, your digital plans, you miss out on the most important player for healthcare delivery.
There's a really interesting point as well that Gerard raised during that sort of his section there, when he was talking about the NHS in particular. And I wonder how true this is of health systems around the world. You've got this situation where Sir Jim Mackey, who is currently running what is still NHS England for the time being, talking about getting back to being patient-centred. When actually, over the last few weeks in the UK, actually all we've really done is kind of navel gaze and talk about structural change and moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. I mean, is there just a lack of focus on the people that actually matter in our health system?
Well, the last book I've written, which is what you were hinting at, is called Personal Health Records for Governments. So my colleague Federica and I looked at 16 different countries and the systems they built for patients having their medical records. And what you see uniformly is not an NHS issue. Every single government is building a system around the government for the patient, but it's really around exposing government funded and government delivered care and the data around it. And they miss out data from the private providers. They miss out data from the patient, which is the most important data set for the next couple of decades. And because they lock it down into a government system, they can't get data from all the innovations happening around apps, devices, and so on, which find every individual government too small to integrate with. It's too siloed. And so that's the price of being government focused rather than patient focused. But it's not a unique NHS problem. In fact, I would say the reverse. Of all the governments I've seen from those 16, the one that's ended up putting an infrastructure to bring in the innovators from outside, whether it's the patient or the private sector, it's the NHS. The NHS app has become a marketplace for bringing in these innovations. But the default is to be very government-centered in the architecture of every country.
Is there a danger of technology overload, though? I mean, you've got so many different systems, and certainly you and I have travelled the world, have been in different markets all over the globe, and there are so many digital health innovators out there. Yeah. Do we not, from both a system and a patient point of view, almost get into a situation of there are too many choices, too many technologies, and it's almost impossible to integrate them all?
Well, have you ever heard this quote, Stephen? I really miss Friendster and Mindspace. Have you ever heard anyone tell you that? Or have you ever heard a consumer saying, I'm really annoyed there's Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram? And that's just social networking, right? So people do understand having different tools for different jobs, and they love the tools improving. So they're fine with the quantity of apps in their personal life because their quality is so high and it keeps on rising. The problem with healthcare apps is their quality is so poor, and sometimes they won't work with each other like the hospital portals, where the business model is to lock in the patient with the hospital. Other times they can't work together just because it's so complex dealing with data in healthcare. This stuff is really hard. But other industries have gone through this, right? And consumers have loved it. So I would just say it's just earlier days in healthcare. You have to let the process work its way through. And honestly, the advances in technology, the possibilities are astonishing if we just let this play out.
I suppose the other question, when we're looking at patient-centered healthcare, when we're looking at trying to look at the people first, is yeah, I talk a lot, and I'll talk a little bit in the next session when we're talking about payer models, about incentives and about perverse incentives. The issue, I guess, or how much of an issue is it that patients simply aren't aware of this question? Because, you know, how much, I guess, does the individual person in the street know or understand that there is a kind of an amalgamation of healthcare data out there sitting in different places, being used in different ways? How much do they know? How much do they care? And how do we get them involved in the democratization of that data process?
So none of them care, and when they do realize it, it's often when they're really sick, and that's the worst time to discover this, but it is true. Look, most people don't understand most data, right? But that's okay. They learn quickly at the point that it matters to them personally, right? So I didn't know what IgG or FBC or LFT meant from my school teacher. I learned it from that nurse. And today I would learn it from ChatGPT. What was really important about my nurse, though, is that she made me believe that it mattered to me personally, that I should pay attention and I should be taking actions. And because that was the way I would be independent for the rest of my life. Now, one thing that's in the news right now is the 23andMe bankruptcy and the genetic data they've got, right? So if you haven't heard yet, genetic sequences are not covered by the USA's medical privacy laws, right? HIPAA, which was written back in the 90s. So the 14 million people who had provided their genetic sequence to 23andMe are not protected as the company has entered bankruptcy proceedings, and whoever buys the company buys the remaining genetic sequences. Now, that's a failure of legislation in not catching up here. It's almost 30 years, and it's also not matching common sense, right? So for contrast, when we look at India's laws, they only allow sharing agreements that most people would assume to be quite common sense. Now, for us, in explaining the data and explaining the sharing, we work hard on this approach, and patients know best. Yeah, I'd noticed early in my research that sharing approaches were harmfully complex, right? They'd have 150 checkboxes in Microsoft Health Vault that let you share your medication, but not your diagnoses, thinking you're being really private. But most people don't understand that a clinician who can see your medications can guess your conditions. So instead, in Patients Know Best, we divided the record into general, mental, sexual, and social. So most people can get their head around what that means. And then they can do the sharing in a simple way. And then we do the hard work behind the scenes with the customer for the mapping. So you really have to translate these medical complexities into intuitive things for the patient, for the moment that they care, for them to be able to quickly pick this thing up.
No, it's a fascinating topic and a fascinating discussion, and I think it's one that I'm really looking forward to getting into in a bit more detail when we're on stage together in Abu Dhabi. We haven't, in the course of this conversation, yet actually linked this to the ways in which these things work in those Middle Eastern systems, and I think you've got a particularly good insight and understanding of that, being based as you are in Bahrain and having seen a lot of those systems. So looking forward to that conversation in Abu Dhabi. That's all we've got time for now. Thanks very much, Mo. We'll see you in Abu Dhabi. Again, I would encourage everybody to reach out to Mo on LinkedIn, or come to us if you'd like to be introduced, because I think that this is a very valuable, very important and fascinating topic. So looking forward to that discussion. This question of data, though, does link into the final topic that I want to discuss today. Data is clearly a key and vital component in the creation of a preventative healthcare agenda. We cannot look at precision medicine. We cannot look at population health and outcomes without access to that data. And these are, again, as I nodded to earlier on in the conversation, some of the absolute key priorities for the Department of Health Abu Dhabi, and indeed for all of the governments of the region. The issue, though, for me, is the question of who pays. If we're going to have preventative healthcare, if we're going to have population health, how do we contract for that? How do we pay for that? And I think I'm joined for, or going to be joined for a session on this topic by a really interesting group of individuals, two of whom are with me right now. Rob McGough, who is a partner at Hill Dickinson, and also the Vice Chair, so is it? Go on. Vice President of the European Association for Value-Based Care?
Value-based healthcare, close, Steve.
I mean, it's been an hour and a half session. Yeah. Alongside him, also Mev Forbes, who is a global opinion leader on the topic of primary care and co-chief executive Fuller and Forbes, and very recently has started experiencing a new healthcare system, having moved from the UK to South Africa. How is South Africa treating you, Mev?
It's a lot warmer than when I left Manchester a few weeks ago, when it was borderline minus figures, and then I walked into 31 degrees Celsius. So it was good.
Absolutely. Well, good to see
I'm not complaining.
Good to see you both. I mean, as I say, I think we're going to be involved in this session talking about preventative care and talking specifically about how it's paid for. And I guess kind of the first question, and I want to put this to both of you, collection of data, interpretation of that data, playing that back to the patient so that they understand what they should be doing, how they can avoid conditions for which they may have a sort of precognition or a tendency, and then putting those kind of therapies in place. Who pays for that? Is that the responsibility of the government? Is it the responsibility of the provider? Is it the responsibility of the payer? How does that kind of work, I guess, in the healthcare systems, the primary care systems? Because you're going to be at the sharp end of this, right? How does this work in the systems that you've experienced?
That is not a small question.
No, is it?
That's a big question, and if you can crack that one, we're all golden. I do like the question, though, because I think it alludes to the underlying premise, which is, for me, is not so much about who pays, but what is it we're actually paying for? And I think, for me, there's a big issue around the scope of healthcare and the scope of primary care, particularly, which is where my interest comes in. Because obviously, I remember a speaker, Martin Fisher, once said that the medical view is the whole view of a person's health. And so when you start thinking along those lines, you're then thinking along food poverty, you're thinking along water, infrastructure, education, and just the vast array of social determinants. And there's a limit to what a hospital and a primary care provider can provide. Or to put it another way, markets respond to consumers, and consumers in healthcare primarily want stuff fixed, not prevented. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And so I think if we're talking about who should pay, I think there's got to be clarity around what it is we're actually paying for. And for me, primary care fundamentally sit as a local community-based service who originally came to fruition, I guess, around responding to emerging health problems, and then, of course, long-term conditions management, and then the role that we've got to play in those patient-to-patient encounters. I think there's definitely a role there, but I think we've got to be very clear about where that stops and where the other parts of the system really kind of steps in. And I can talk about how that gets paid and all the rest. I'm assuming we're going to come on to that. But my first thoughts as a starting gambit.
I think the nub of it for me, and you said this beautifully, is that point around health systems are designed and insurance systems are designed around the idea that it's almost like a. I think there's a great analogy between motoring and healthcare, in the respect that, you know, it's the garage is there to fix the car when it goes wrong. Who's going to stop the car going wrong in the first place? Well, you do have to go in for a service every now and then, so maybe that's part of the kind of issue here. But, you know, when you've got a system that's designed to fix a problem when a problem occurs, how, Rob, do you pivot towards creating a system that stops it from going wrong in the first place?
Yeah, it's a nice analogy. I'd say the trouble is that we're running an older Ford Cortina at the moment.
I don't know about you, but I'm definitely an old banger.
but I think it is. I mean, I think Matt, I agree completely. The question shouldn't be who pays; it's what we're paying for, because we're paying anyway at the moment. It's I suppose we're starting off with almost an assumption that we're paying more for prevention than we're paying at the moment. And I think the challenge that we're facing, the challenge that global healthcare economies are facing at the moment, is that the costs are rising exponentially, and the tax revenues and the fees that are going in aren't rising at the same rates. And so you're creating an issue then where people are saying, well, do we have to compromise on quality? Do we have to compromise on services? And then you start moving to more of an insurance model. I think that's the challenge that you see concepts such as value-based healthcare and population health models starting to come through. I mean, the challenge is being clear around what we want to pay for and what services we think are the appropriate. To be preventative, we have to invest upstream to try and prevent people then walking through the door in primary care, or people walking through the door in the hospital. The responsibility for that, Steve, I think, taking your analogy, is that there's almost a part of the population is, and this with insurance-backed systems is, well, yeah, you should be coming in for your checkup, you should be doing these things, and then your insurance premium can reflect the fact that you're a good customer, you're a good visitor, and therefore we can keep track of it, and we know that you're less likely to have something which is going to shift you right into the unhealthy categories. So I think that's in those systems it's easier. In systems such as the Bevanesque system, the NHS, there's a whole question. And I think, Methan, I really liked your point around it's the wider determinants, is where do you stop? Because if it's a government looking at it, Steve, then one should be looking at it from the perspective of education and everybody, and saying, well, actually, I want to facilitate a budget that is going to meet those outcomes and those aims, which are preventative. However, you've still got to treat the people when they get ill. So you've got to keep both sides of that running. So I suppose that it's a long-winded way of saying the system needs to pivot, because at the moment it's just basically dealing with the activity, dealing with the problem when it comes through. And you can't sustain a system with the way that the population demographics and the demand is going on that basis. So it needs to be that who is going to pay for it? Well, we need to determine what the healthcare service needs to look like. We need to look more innovatively at the technology. And that means that the payment system needs to be less designated on activity and more pivoting towards value and activity, which is obviously, is where I come into my views.
And I guess the car analogy is one that you can stretch pretty thin. You can do quite a lot with it. I mean, it is that point around, we are used to the idea that when we've done a certain number of miles, the car will tell us that we need to go and get the thing serviced. We know that it's going to need an oil change. We know that the tyres, when they get to a certain point, will tell us that we need to go in and get them fixed. And I guess in many ways, the preventative agenda, Mev, is about that. There's a real link here into public health as well, isn't there? Because there's that piece around communicating, when the driver needs to take the car into the garage, or in this particular case, when an individual needs to have an health system to understand how much tread they've got left on their tyres.
We could stretch this car analogy to breaking point. So I'm just going to add one more to it, which is, if you think about an automatic car and you then have a manual car, and the automatic car knows when to change gears, etc., and it does it for you. But I remember one time when I landed in Switzerland, I just gone to the airport, dropped off my automatic, picked up a manual car, and then I was leaving Geneva Airport, and I was thinking, what on earth is that noise? And it took me about 5 minutes to work out, but I was still driving in first gear. I was still on automatic modes. But translating that, I mean, the problem with all of this is, we as humans, we shift gears. We decide whether we want to shift gear into exercising or out of exercising, whether to shift gears into eating healthy and out of eating healthy. I mean, I did it on Sunday. I was really tired in the afternoon. I thought, well, do I cook myself, a roast meal with fruit and veg, or do I go to KFC and have a bargain bucket? I chose KFC, and of course that's a public health thing. And I didn't eat the whole bucket; it was a small bucket. And but I didn't. But those are the choices we make. And I've been in healthcare for a long time, so I know what the the research says about health and well-being and all of these things. But there is a point where, and I see it in the UK, where education will take people so far, it will take the health economy so far. But ultimately, and we're not going to get away from this, that people will still make the decisions they make. And those decisions might not always be in the best interest of a healthcare system or the public purse. And so there is a clash that's happening, and there's going to be a bigger clash, as the world ages and gets older, and we figure out how to stop people from dying from long-term conditions, but we eke out extra years of life. They're still living with the consequences of the decisions they make, and that's going to cost more and more money. And so at some point, does it get completely unaffordable, in which case we have to draw a line and say what's in and out? Or rather, what money do we have available to spend on healthcare? And therefore, what quality healthcare can we buy for that? And what you can buy is what you can buy, and what you can't buy is what you can't buy. And I don't see any resolution to that other than something along the lines. And I think it's going to be very difficult for an economy like the NHS, where absolutely everything has been in, including every election promises that there's ever been.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, and again, I mean, the theory should be, Rob nodded to this, I think, earlier on in the conversation, that prevention should be cheaper than cure. It's easier, or it should be easier to stop people from getting sick than it is to make them better. Again, I'm going to keep stretching this car analogy. There's another point here around, there is a responsibility from government, whether at local or national level, to fill in the potholes, to make sure that the road is gritted so that there's not ice on the road and we don't slide off and crash. So there is a role for government to play. And I guess the point that leads me to is, when you think about paying for preventative care, the complexity of it is so much greater, isn't it? Because whereas you take a really simple example of okay, my hip's crumbling, I've got to go into hospital, I've got a hip replacement, after that I'll walk. Preventative care is not as simple as that. It can involve multidisciplinary teams, it can involve the primary care facility, it can involve the acute facility. Rehabilitation for a serious illness or a serious condition can also involve looking after somebody's mental health. There's physiotherapy and aftercare involved. How on
treating the whole person, Steve, isn't it? This is the thing. But this is, when you look at it, isn't that what healthcare systems should be doing, rather than just focusing on a crumbling hip? Or if we've got the technology, we've got the data, then why shouldn't we be focusing on Steve's banger in the total, the gearbox, the wheels, to take your analogy to again? Because if the wheels are going above, yes, we need to fix them. But actually, if they've been grinding and they're causing other issues, and this is where I think we miss and this one of the key problems with most healthcare systems is the comorbidities. Is we treat one thing and we treat your diabetes and we treat it really well, but we fail to spot the cardio issues and that's a different pathway. And it's how prevention and how that model it works it has to work in a more integrated way, exactly as you say, because there are so many multifaceted areas that are involved in it.
But then the issue
of providers and commissioning pots that don't align.
But then the issue when you talk about outcome-based contracting or value-based healthcare is the fact, are you not then creating an incredibly complex matrix? If you're going to treat the whole person, somewhere along the line you have to pay for treating the whole person, and that means a multiplicity of different thoughts and calculations about what each part of that system is worth and how the remuneration goes back into all of those different organizations and different players within that multidisciplinary group. It's an incredibly difficult problem.
I agree. It is complex, but then the current systems that we have are very complex as well, and they don't deliver the outcomes. So I think the argument that, oh, it's too complex. Well, yes, it is complex, but we have the systems, we have the mechanisms to be doing that, and we've done that in small parts. You can show some good population health examples globally. Places like Singapore have done some really well with Sing Health. You can show that this can work, and it's different models, moving to bundles, moving to capitation, taking a different approach to how you think around the finance, so that actually we take decisions around the finance with a view to the wider, and things like Australia. I think we've had this conversation before, Steve. Every time they're taking decisions in Australia, they have a view to health. What's the impact of health? If we're doing this housing program, what's the impact on health? If we're doing this program around sewage and drainage, what's the impact on health? And it's pulling that back to become a core part of what we think, rather than being a separate, oh, we just treat people when they get really sick in a hospital. So it's thinking differently around that. And it is a challenge and it is complex, but we've, at the moment, in most of the healthcare systems I've worked in, we have incredibly complex healthcare commissioning and provision systems already that don't deliver significantly good outcomes and don't focus on the patient.
And unfortunately, we've run out of time. Again,
We've run out of road, Steve.
We've run out of road, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, next stop Abu Dhabi from that point of view, because we'll have a little bit more time to discuss and debate this, and perhaps get into how we solve. We've almost framed the problem. How do we now solve it? Really interesting thought there about kind of multidisciplinary teams and how they come together and get paid to treat an issue. That was treatment. We haven't even got into the idea of how you create that complex payment model around prevention. But as I say, we don't have time for that now. We will have time for it in Abu Dhabi between the 14th and the 17th of April. All of my guests today will be there. I would recommend, if you've not already booked your flight and your hotel, you've still just about got time. Get yourself out to Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. It's going to be a fantastic week. The live stage will be packed with some great speakers. I want to thank my guests today, Trevor, Ben, Ema, and that amazing insight into what's happening in Alzheimer's. Bjorn, of course, giving us some great examples from Sweden. Julie and Gerard on the data and quality points. Mo, always a fascinating discussion. That's going to be a great one for a fireside chat on the healthcare world stage in Abu Dhabi. And of course, Mev and Rob, thank you also to all of you who've watched this morning. It's been a fascinating conversation as always. So until the next Healthcare World Series or until Abu Dhabi, thank you very much. My name's Steve Gardner. Make sure that you go and have a look at the latest edition of Healthcare World at www.healthcareworld.com. Thanks very much. Goodbye.